The first thing Cameron Voss noticed was the sound. Not the orchestra, no. Not the soft violin that floated above the ocean like a lie. It was the clink of crystal. Two champagne flutes touching somewhere behind him, a tiny, polite collision, and yet it landed in his chest like a verdict. Cameron stood near the edge of the Seacliff Estate terrace, where the Atlantic kept breathing in the dark below. The wind carried salt and money. It lifted the women's silk wraps, teased the men's tuxedo lapels, and made the white roses tremble as if they'd heard a secret. Beside Cameron, Brielle Kane looped her arm through his with practiced precision. Soft nails, strong grip. Her smile stayed in place like a signature at the bottom of a contract. "Relax," she murmured, barely moving her lips. "Every important person in Harborcrest is here tonight. You look like you're waiting to be audited." Cameron forced a laugh. He raised his glass. The pale gold inside caught the terrace lights and turned into liquid applause. But his hand didn't stop trembling. Because the second thing Cameron noticed was a color. Moss green. It moved through the crowd like a quiet answer, like nature intruding into a room built to ignore it. A dress, not loud, not glittering, not trying. Just there. Elegant the way a forest is elegant. Uncomplicated, unbuyable. And inside that moss green, Ilara Finch walked like she belonged to herself. Not to him. Not to the past. Not to anyone. Cameron's breath tightened. He hadn't seen Ilara in almost 2 years. Not since the courthouse. Not since the signatures. Not since he'd watched her walk away with a box of her own things and a face that never begged. He'd told himself she would break. He'd told himself she would realize what she lost. He'd told himself the quiet women always did. But Ilara didn't look broken. She looked awake. And then Cameron saw the man at her side, Silas Keene. Even if you didn't know the name, you knew the gravity. He moved through space the way a lighthouse owns the coastline. No rush, no noise, no need to prove. He wore a simple black suit, no flash, no show, the kind of tailoring that whispered instead of shouted. His cufflinks weren't diamonds. They were matte metal, clean lines, almost architectural. His power didn't sparkle. It settled. Silas leaned down and said something close to Ilara's ear. She smiled, not for the room, not for the cameras, but like someone had just reminded her of a private joke. Brielle's nails pressed a little harder into Cameron's arm. "Oh," Brielle whispered, recognizing the shift in the air. "So that's her." Cameron didn't answer. His throat had gone dry. Silas Keene turned. For a moment, his gaze traveled across the terrace, across the chandeliers and the silk and the strategic laughter, until it landed on Cameron. The eye contact was steady, polite, and devastating. Silas began walking toward them. People moved aside without realizing they were moving. Conversations softened like curtains falling. Cameron felt his own body straighten, as if preparing for a pitch meeting, as if this was business, as if the right posture could protect him. Silas stopped in front of him. Up close, there was something almost disarming about him. His face held no arrogance. His voice, when it came, was low, warm in a way Cameron hadn't expected. "Cameron Voss," Silas said. Cameron nodded once, tight. "Silas Keene." Silas smiled. Not smug, not triumphant, grateful. "I've wanted to meet you," Silas said, "to thank you." Cameron blinked. "For what?" Silas's gaze didn't flinch. It didn't attack. It simply held the truth. "For the past," Silas said softly. "For making a decision that led Ilara to me." The ocean wind surged. Somewhere behind them, crystal clinked again. And Cameron Voss, who had stood in boardrooms and courtroom corridors and penthouse windows above Manhattan, felt smaller than he ever had in his expensive life. He opened his mouth. No sound came, because on the other side of Silas's shoulder, Ilara Finch looked at Cameron the way you look at a closed chapter you once survived. Not with hatred, not with longing, with calm. And in that calm, Cameron realized something he'd never allowed himself to understand. This was not a reunion. This was a reckoning. And to understand how a man like Cameron Voss ended up trembling on a terrace in Harbor Crest, we have to go back. Not to the wedding, not to the divorce, but to the moment he first decided love wasn't enough unless it looked like power. Because this story didn't begin at Seacliff Estate. New York City taught Cameron Voss a language. Not English, numbers, titles, square footage, net worth. He learned early that people listened harder when you spoke in metrics. The glasshouse penthouse in Midtown wasn't just an apartment. It was a statement. It was walls of glass that looked down on the city like a verdict. It was marble that never warmed. It was a kitchen no one cooked in, because cooking was time, and time was currency. When Alara moved in, she didn't treat it like a trophy. She treated it like weather, something you lived inside but never worshipped. The first winter, Cameron came home late, coat still on, tie loosened, phone still in his hand like an extension of his heartbeat. Ilara was at the dining table with paper spread out, sketches, notes, tiny rectangles drawn like miniature gardens. Cameron paused, watching her. She had a way of being quiet without being small. She looked up, smiled. "Hey, you're back." "Long day," Cameron said, already scrolling. "We closed the Harbor Line deal." Ilara's eyes softened. "That's huge." He waited for her to ask details. She didn't. Instead, she gestured to the paper. "I've been working on something too." Cameron barely glanced. "Is that another plant wall thing?" Ilara laughed gently. "Not just a plant wall, it's a system, modular living panels for buildings. They reduce heat loss, filter air, and look pretty," Cameron finished, not unkindly, but dismissive in the way busy men dismissed what didn't feed their ego. Ilara's smile faltered for half a second, then returned like a trained reflex. "They're functional and scalable. I'm calling it Evergrove." "Evergrove," Cameron repeated, tasting the word like it was too soft to be serious. Ilara leaned forward, excited now. "Think about it. Luxury buildings are desperate for a new story. Sustainability is the new status symbol. I've been researching biomaterials. If we partner with—" "Babe," Cameron interrupted, sighing. "That's cute, but it's not real." Ilara blinked. "Not real?" "It's idealistic," he said, searching for words that sounded like concern but felt like control. "New York runs on aggressive timelines. If you want to do something meaningful, fine. Volunteer, teach a class. But don't pretend the world is going to pay you to put moss on walls." "Moss isn't the point," Ilara said, still calm, though her cheeks had colored. "The point is creating spaces that—" "Spaces," Cameron echoed, already moving away. "Ilara, I'm dealing with acquisitions, real money, real power." She sat still, hands resting on the papers as if holding them in place so they wouldn't fly away. "You don't think this is ambitious," she said quietly. Cameron didn't look back. "I think you're talented. I just need someone who can keep up." That sentence should have been a warning bell. Instead, Cameron treated it like a truth. Because Cameron Voss didn't know how to respect a dream unless it came with a Forbes headline. He didn't know how to see ambition unless it wore a suit. And Ilara Finch, who had grown up in a small coastal town with dirt under her nails and sunlight in her bones, didn't speak the language of trophies. She spoke the language of roots. At first, it was small things. Cameron would forget dinners. Ilara would make them anyway and eat alone without complaint. Cameron would bring home gossip from the financial world, laughing at someone's failed startup. Ilara would ask gentle questions, trying to understand. And Cameron, slowly, began to resent her gentleness the way insecure men resent anything that doesn't compete. Because Ilara didn't fight for attention. She didn't demand applause. She wasn't impressed by the penthouse or the view, and in Cameron's mind, that meant she didn't value him enough. So he started seeking value elsewhere. That's how Brielle Kane entered the picture. Brielle didn't walk into Cameron's life like love, she walked in like momentum. They met at a gala, one of those events where people pretended art mattered more than networking. Brielle was sharp, confident, dressed in white like she owned the room. She laughed at Cameron's jokes in exactly the right places. She asked about his portfolio. She complimented his instinct. She didn't ask about his childhood. She didn't ask about his heart. She asked about his trajectory. And Cameron, exhausted from Alara's quiet steadiness, mistook Brielle's hunger for compatibility. It happened gradually, the way a crack forms in glass. A late-night business drink. A text message too casual. A dinner where Brielle said, "You're wasted on someone who doesn't understand what you're building." The first time Cameron came home and Alara asked, "Are you happy?" he snapped. "Why do you always make it about feelings?" he said. "I'm building a future." Alara's eyes stayed on him a long time. Then she looked down at her hands, where ink had stained her fingers from her sketches. "I'm building one too," she said. But Cameron had already decided which future mattered more. The divorce was clean, efficient, like Cameron wanted. No screaming, no thrown objects, no dramatic courtroom scene. Just papers, just signatures, just the quiet finality of a woman who refused to beg. At the courthouse steps, Alara held a small cardboard box with her things, some books, a few plants she refused to abandon, her sketch notebook. Cameron stood with his lawyer, already checking his phone. Alara paused, looked up at him. Not accusing, not pleading, just present. "I hope you get what you think you want," she said softly. Cameron gave a tight smile. "I will." Alara nodded once and walked away. Cameron watched her go for maybe 2 seconds before turning back to his phone, back to the world that clapped for him. That night, in the glass house penthouse, now echoing with victory, Cameron found something on the dining table. Alara's notebook. He must have missed it. He picked it up, flipping through pages. Diagrams, notes, names of materials, sketches of living walls and modular panels. A handwritten sentence near the top. "Luxury can heal, not just impress." Cameron scoffed. He walked to the kitchen trash bin, sleek, hidden behind a cabinet like shame, and tossed the notebook in. Paper hit plastic with a dull thud. A small sound. A careless sound. A sound that would come back to haunt him. Cameron Voss wasn't born on the 61st floor. He was born in a town where winter ate everything. A place of closed factories and tired men and mothers who learned to stretch meals like miracles. His father worked 2 jobs and still got called lucky by people who'd never missed a rent payment. Cameron learned early that dignity was fragile. He learned that one bad month could turn you invisible. In high school, he wore the same jacket for 3 years. He kept his head down. He listened to the kids with richer parents talk about ski trips like they were weather. And he promised himself something in the quiet of his bedroom. Never again. Never again would he be the one people overlooked. Never again would he be the one people pitied. So when Cameron got a scholarship, he treated it like escape. When he got into finance, he treated it like revenge. He didn't just want stability, he wanted dominance. He wanted to walk into rooms and watch people change their posture. He wanted the world to apologize for ever making him feel small. That's the thing about unresolved shame. It doesn't disappear. It disguises itself as ambition. Alara never knew the full shape of Cameron's shame because Cameron never admitted he had it. He told her stories about hustle, about winning, about building an empire. He didn't tell her about the nights as a kid when his mother cried quietly in the kitchen, thinking he couldn't hear. He didn't tell her about the time a teacher said, "People like you don't usually make it." So when Alara sat at the table with her sketches and said, "We could build something that helps people breathe," Cameron heard something else. He heard softness. He heard vulnerability. He heard the old fear of being laughed at. And he couldn't stand it. Because Cameron believed, deep down, that if you didn't prove yourself constantly, the world would step on you. He thought love was something you earned by being impressive. Alara loved without conditions, and that terrified him. So he pushed her away before she could expose what he was hiding. He chose Brielle because Brielle didn't ask him to feel. Brielle asked him to win, and Cameron thought that was the same thing as being loved. It wasn't. 2 years after the divorce, Cameron's life looked perfect from the outside. He was engaged. He was featured in magazines. He hosted rooftop dinners where the city lights made everyone feel important. Brielle Kane was flawless in photos. She leaned into him at events. She wore his success like jewelry. She spoke about our future in interviews with the polished warmth of someone selling a brand. And Cameron played his part. But behind the glass, the penthouse was colder than ever. Brielle didn't leave clothes on the floor. She didn't forget birthdays. She also didn't laugh at Cameron when no one was watching. She didn't ask how his day felt. She asked how it performed. "Your market perception needs tightening," she'd say, scrolling through her tablet. "You're trending strong, but you can do better." Cameron told himself that was partnership. That was power couple logic. But something in him, something he'd buried under numbers, kept tapping like a small fist from inside the walls. Then the invitation arrived. Cream paper, embossed gold letters, the Waverly Wedding Seacliff Estate. Harborcrest, Rhode Island. Cameron recognized the names. The Waverlys were old money. Their guest list would be a map of influence. Brielle's eyes lit up when she saw it. "This is perfect," she said. "For what?" Cameron asked. Brielle smiled, already planning. "For showing them who you are now." Cameron smirked despite himself. "They already know. They know your resume," Brielle corrected. "They don't know your story. We're going to give them one." The phrase "give them one" made Cameron uneasy, but he ignored it. That's what he did with uneasiness. He buried it. The week before Harborcrest, Cameron caught himself thinking about Alara for the first time in months. He told himself it was coincidence. He told himself it was nostalgia. He told himself he was just curious whether she'd moved on. But the truth was simpler. A part of him wanted confirmation that he'd been right, that leaving her had been the correct move, that she was still quiet, still small, still somewhere in the background, proving that Cameron's world was the only world that mattered. He didn't realize he was walking toward the exact opposite. The day they arrived in Harborcrest, the town was drenched in summer wealth. White fences, hydrangeas, sailboats in the distance like accessories. Seacliff Estate rose above the cliffs like it had been carved from privilege itself. Brielle stepped out of the car and inhaled. "This air smells like generational money," she said, delighted. Cameron forced a laugh, but his stomach had tightened, because something about the ocean made him feel, briefly, like a kid again. Small, exposed. The rehearsal dinner was a blur of introductions. Brielle moved like she'd rehearsed for this her whole life, laughing, name-dropping, connecting. Cameron followed, smiling, shaking hands. Then, near the edge of the room, he heard a name. Not his, hers. "Alara Finch," someone said, warm and impressed. "Evergrove is incredible." Cameron's head snapped slightly. He kept his expression neutral, but his heart kicked. Evergrove. That word, soft, green, impossible, hit him like déjà vu. He walked closer, careful not to look too eager. A woman in pearls was speaking. "They redesigned the entire coastal wing with bio-integrated materials. It's stunning." Another voice. "And the founder is, what's her name again? Finch? Married to Silas Keene now, right?" Cameron's hand tightened around his drink. Married. Silas Keene. Brielle noticed his stillness and leaned in. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Cameron lied. But the room tilted slightly, the way it does when your past rearranges itself. He told himself it couldn't be the same Alara. He told himself Finch was a common name. He told himself he was overreacting. And then, on the morning of the wedding, he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, and whispered to his own reflection. "Just one more room. One more show. Then it's done." He didn't know what it was, but the words felt like a prayer or a warning. Seacliff Estate at dusk looked unreal. White tents along the lawn, lanterns floating like fireflies. The ocean below endless and indifferent. Guests glided in like they were born into elegance. Brielle wore a silver dress that caught every light in the room, like she wanted the world to see her before it saw anyone else. Cameron wore a black tuxedo and the confident mask he'd spent his entire life perfecting. They stepped onto the terrace. Brielle scanned the crowd with a predator's focus. "There," she murmured, nodding at a cluster of powerful-looking people. "That's Senator Holden's wife. And that's Archer Waverly. And—" Cameron barely listened, because somewhere deep in the sea of faces, he felt the pull of something green. Moss green. It moved through the crowd quietly, parting people without pushing. Cameron's chest tightened. Ilara. For a moment, he couldn't reconcile her with his memory. She wasn't wearing the shy dresses he used to dismiss. She wasn't shrinking her shoulders. She wasn't apologizing with her posture. She walked with a calm certainty that wasn't arrogance, just self-possession. Her hair was pinned back in a loose, elegant twist. Her earrings were small, simple gold, like sunlight caught in metal. She looked at ease among the wealthy, not because she was trying to fit, but because she didn't need their permission. Cameron took a step without realizing it. Brielle caught his arm. "Don't," she whispered, sharp. "Not yet." "Not yet?" Cameron repeated, voice stiff. Brielle smiled for the cameras nearby. "Let her come to you. That's the power move." Cameron stared at Ilara across the terrace. Ilara turned her head slightly, as if sensing him. Their eyes met. In that instant, Cameron expected something. Pain, anger, a flash of the woman he left behind. Instead, Ilara's gaze was steady, neutral, as if he were a stranger. And that, more than any insult, made Cameron feel like he'd been erased. Then the crowd shifted. A man joined Ilara, stepping into view like a shadow resolving into form. Silas Keene. He didn't announce himself. He didn't perform. He simply arrived, and the air changed. People angled their bodies toward him unconsciously, the way flowers turn toward sunlight. Silas's hand rested lightly at Ilara's back. Not possessive, not showy, protective, maybe. Proud, definitely. Ilara spoke to him, and Silas listened like she mattered more than the room. Cameron watched, frozen. Brielle's grip on his arm tightened. "That's him," she murmured. "Silas Keene, tech empire, quiet killer. God, this is interesting." Cameron's mouth was dry. "She's with him." Brielle's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Apparently." Cameron couldn't look away. He saw Ilara laugh softly at something Silas said. Not the polite laugh Ilara used to give Cameron's friends. A real one. A warm one. The kind of laughter that comes from safety. Cameron's throat tightened with something sharp and unfamiliar. Jealousy. Not of Silas's money, not of his status, of his peace. Then the bride's mother stepped onto the small stage, tapping her glass. "Everyone," she announced, voice bright, "before we begin, we want to honor the woman who made Seacliff's transformation possible." Cameron's pulse spiked. The woman continued. "The Seacliff Coastal Wing was redesigned by Evergrove Design Lab, an extraordinary team led by an extraordinary visionary." Cameron's fingers went numb. "Ilara Finch Keene," the woman said proudly. "Please join us for a moment." Applause erupted. Not polite applause. Real applause. Cameron watched Ilara step forward. Her face held no smugness, just composure. She accepted a small plaque, exchanged a few words, thanked the family, thanked the team. Her voice carried, clear, calm, confident. Then she stepped back and Silas took her hand. Cameron's stomach dropped. Evergrove. Ilara. Keene. The pieces clicked into place with cruel precision. And in his mind, like a memory rising from the bottom of a trash bin, Cameron saw the notebook again. The sketches. The sentence. "Luxury can heal, not just impress." His chest tightened painfully. Brielle leaned in, whispering without looking at him. "We need to be careful. Don't let this throw you off your game." "My game," Cameron muttered, barely aware he spoke. Then Silas Keene turned. His gaze found Cameron like it had been searching. He began walking toward them, and Cameron, who had trained his whole life to never show weakness, felt his mask cracking. Silas stopped in front of him, extended a hand. Cameron shook it automatically. The grip was firm, calm, unhurried. "Cameron Voss," Silas said. Cameron nodded. "Silas Keene." Silas smiled, almost gentle. "I've wanted to meet you," Silas said. Cameron forced a smirk. "So I've heard." Silas's smile didn't change. "To thank you." Cameron's brows pulled together. "For what exactly?" Silas's eyes were steady. No threat, no competition, just truth. "For the past," Silas said softly. "For making a choice that led Alara to the life she deserves." The words sliced cleanly. Brielle's smile froze. Her eyes flicked between them like a calculator. Cameron swallowed. "You're welcome," he said, sarcasm thin. Silas didn't react to the sarcasm. "I mean it," Silas continued. "I've learned something from Alara. People don't become themselves in comfort. They become themselves after the world tests them." Cameron's jaw tightened. "You're saying I tested her?" "I'm saying," Silas replied, voice still calm, "that what you dismissed became her empire." Cameron's breath hitched. Silas's gaze softened slightly. "And I'm grateful I got to witness it." Then Silas stepped aside. Alara stood there, close now, close enough for Cameron to see the details. The faint scar near her thumb from a childhood accident. The way her eyes held more light than before. The way she no longer searched faces for approval. Cameron's voice came out rough. "Alara." Alara nodded once. "Cameron." Just that. No warmth, no bitterness, just a name, like closing a file. Cameron tried to smile. You look good." Alara's expression stayed polite. "Thank you." Brielle cut in smoothly, bright and sharp. "Alara, hi, I'm Brielle, Cameron's fiancée." Alara glanced at Brielle, then back at Cameron. "Congratulations." Brielle's smile sharpened. "You're doing well for yourself." Ilara's eyes didn't narrow, didn't flare. "I'm doing well for my team," she said evenly. Silas watched quietly, a steady presence. Not intervening, not saving. Trusting Alara to handle her own history. Cameron's throat tightened. He wanted to say something that would reclaim the narrative. He wanted to say he always believed in her. He wanted to say he inspired her. But the truth sat in his chest like a stone. He threw her dream in the trash. And now that dream was being applauded by people Cameron spent his life trying to impress. Cameron's voice dropped. "Evergrove. That was yours." Alara held his gaze. "It was always mine." Silas's hand brushed lightly against Alara's fingers, a silent reminder, "You're safe." Cameron's face burned. He nodded stiffly. "I see." Alara didn't gloat. She didn't twist the knife. She simply said, "I hope you're well, Cameron." And in that sentence, Cameron heard something devastating. She meant it, because she no longer needed his ruin to feel whole. She had already won her life back. And Cameron realized in that moment that the worst punishment isn't being hated. It's being irrelevant. That night, after the speeches, after the photos, after Brielle posed with perfect laughter beside people who didn't care about her name, Cameron stood alone at the edge of the lawn. The ocean roared below like a truth no one could silence. He watched Alara and Silas from a distance. Alara wasn't clinging to Silas's arm like an accessory. She stood beside him like a partner. When people approached Silas, they often ended up looking at Alara more, because Silas redirected their attention to her with subtle pride. A man asked Silas about a tech venture. Silas listened, then said, "You should ask Alara. She understands systems better than anyone." Alara smiled, answered, and the man nodded, impressed. Cameron felt something inside him crack. Not anger, not even jealousy anymore. Regret, raw, clean, undeniable. Brielle found him a few minutes later, heels clicking on stone. "We're leaving early," she said. Cameron looked at her. "Why?" Brielle's eyes were cold now, calculation on full display. This is dangerous. You look destabilized. Destabilized, Cameron repeated, voice flat. Brielle exhaled impatiently. People are watching. Your ex-wife is a headline tonight. Silas Keene is a headline tonight. And you, she pointed subtly at his chest, you look like you're losing. Cameron stared at her. Losing what? Brielle's smile was thin. The story. Cameron's laugh came out sharp, humorless. You mean my image? Brielle didn't deny it. Image is value. Value is power. Power is security. Cameron turned away, looking back at the ocean. Brielle stepped closer, voice lower. We can control this. We spin it. We talk about your next deal, your next move. We don't let her... Her, Cameron interrupted, turning back. His eyes were tired. You're talking about her like she's a stock. Brielle's expression flickered. Don't be dramatic. Cameron shook his head slowly. You know what's dramatic? Brielle's brow lifted. What? Building a life out of mirrors, Cameron said quietly, and realizing one calm person can shatter it without even trying. Brielle stared at him, impatience sharpening. Cameron, pull yourself together. Something in Cameron's chest hardened, not with arrogance but with clarity. He looked at Brielle fully for the first time in months. He saw the way her affection always had conditions, the way her smiles were strategic, the way her love felt like a partnership agreement. And suddenly, he understood why Alara's quiet love used to make him uncomfortable. Because it was real, and real things can't be controlled. Cameron's voice was calm when he said it. I can't marry you. Brielle's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. Excuse me? I said, Cameron repeated, I can't marry you. Brielle laughed once, sharp. You're emotional because your ex-wife showed up in a pretty dress. Cameron didn't flinch. No, I'm awake because I finally see what this is. Brielle's gaze flashed. This is what you wanted. We talked about this. We're a power couple. We're building something. We're building a brand, Cameron corrected softly. Not a life. Brielle's jaw tightened. You're going to regret this. Cameron nodded. I already regret enough. Brielle stepped closer, voice cold. You think you can just walk away? Do you know what this will do to your reputation? Cameron's eyes lifted. Maybe my reputation deserves it. For a moment, Brielle looked genuinely stunned. Then her face smoothed into something sharp and unfamiliar. You're making a mistake, she said evenly, and mistakes have consequences. Cameron exhaled. So do lies. He walked past her. Brielle turned, voice cutting. Where are you going? Cameron didn't stop. Home. But even as he said the word, he knew. The penthouse wasn't home. It was a glass cage. In the weeks that followed, Cameron did what no one expected him to do. He called off the engagement publicly. He sold the glass house penthouse. He stepped down from the role that had become his entire identity. People whispered. Friends called him unstable. Brielle's circles treated him like a fallen asset, and Cameron let them. Because for the first time, he wasn't chasing their approval. He was trying to find himself beneath all the polished surfaces. 6 months later, Cameron Voss's life looked smaller, but it felt lighter. He lived in a modest apartment in Hudson Vale, 2 rooms, warm light, no floor-to-ceiling glass. He worked at an ethical investment fund. The pay was less. The hours were humane. And the work, funding sustainable housing, community farms, clean infrastructure, felt like building something that didn't rot from the inside. On his first day, his new boss, a woman with gray hair and unhurried eyes, looked at him and said, We don't worship money here. We use it. If you're here to worship it, you'll hate this job. Cameron had nodded, throat tight. I'm here to learn. And he meant it. He started volunteering on weekends at a local community garden. The first time he put his hands into soil, he flinched. It was damp, cold, alive. He'd spent years touching only glass and metal, surfaces that gave nothing back. The earth gave back immediately. It stained his fingers. It forced him to be present. He learned how to plant seedlings, how to pull weeds, how to wait. Waiting was the hardest part. Cameron used to believe speed was power. But plants didn't care about his urgency. They grew when they were ready. Slowly, Cameron's breathing changed. His sleep deepened. He stopped checking his phone every 5 seconds. He started noticing small things. Sunlight on a kitchen counter, the sound of rain, the way a tomato plant leaned toward warmth. And then, one Saturday morning, he went to the Hudson Vale Farmers Market. It was a simple place. Wooden stalls, baskets of fruit, jars of honey, laughter that wasn't curated. The air smelled like bread and earth and something honest. Cameron walked through slowly, hands in his pockets, wearing jeans and a plain jacket. No suit, no performance. Just a man learning how to be real. He stopped near a stall selling herbs, fresh basil, rosemary, mint. He inhaled, surprised by how alive it smelled. And then he saw her. Moss green. Not a dress this time, a simple sweater. Ilara Finch. Keene stood at a stall, choosing vegetables with calm focus. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands moved gently over produce like she respected what it took to grow it. She looked the same and not the same. She looked like a woman who had survived and then built something beautiful on the other side. Cameron froze. His heart didn't spike with panic the way it used to. It ached, softly. He didn't know if he should approach. He didn't know what he deserved. But something in him, something new, told him this wasn't about deserving. It was about honesty. He walked closer, slow, careful. "Ilara," he said. She turned. Her eyes met his. For a moment, her face was unreadable. Then she nodded once. "Cameron." They stood there among baskets of carrots and lettuce, like two people meeting in a world that didn't care about their old story. Cameron swallowed. "I didn't know you lived out here." Ilara's expression softened slightly. "We have a project nearby, a sustainable housing initiative. I come on weekends when I can." Cameron nodded, eyes dropping to her hands. "That makes sense." Silence. Not awkward, just real. Cameron looked up. "I saw Evergrove is expanding to the West Coast." Ilara tilted her head. "You keep up?" Cameron's mouth twitched. "I try to. It's impressive." Ilara studied him briefly. "You look different." Cameron exhaled, almost a laugh. "Yeah, I feel different." Ilara waited. She didn't fill silence. She never had. Cameron's throat tightened. He chose the truth. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Ilara's eyes didn't widen. She didn't flinch. She simply listened. "I'm sorry for what I said," Cameron continued. "For what I didn't see, for treating your dream like it was decorative." Ilara's gaze stayed on him, steady. Cameron's voice grew rougher. "I threw your notebook away." The confession hung in the air like a torn curtain. Ilara's lips parted slightly, then closed. Her eyes flickered, not with rage, but with something like confirmation, as if she had always suspected. Cameron nodded, shame burning. "I did it because I was afraid, not of you, of me, of being the kind of person the world laughs at." Ilara's voice was soft when she spoke. "Cameron, the world doesn't laugh at people who build. It laughs at people who pretend." Cameron swallowed hard. Ilara continued, calm. "I wasn't broken after the divorce." Cameron's eyes flickered. "I know." "I was hurt," Ilara corrected gently. "There's a difference." Cameron nodded once, feeling something in his chest ease and ache at the same time. "I see that now." Ilara studied him, then glanced around the market. Families, children, old couples holding hands without needing to prove anything. "You seem quieter," she said. Cameron breathed out. "Yeah, turns out quiet isn't weakness." Ilara's mouth curved faintly. "No, it never was." A pause. Cameron hesitated, then said, "I called off the engagement." Ilara nodded, unsurprised. "I heard." "I'm working at an ethical fund now," Cameron added, almost shy about it, like a kid sharing a new identity. Ilara's eyes warmed. Good. That single word, good, landed in Cameron's chest with more weight than praise ever had. Because it wasn't applause. It was acknowledgement. Cameron looked at her and realized something. He didn't want her back. Not in the old way. Not as possession. Not as proof. He wanted her to keep being free. He wanted her to keep building. And he wanted to be the kind of man who could watch someone else shine without needing to dim them. He nodded, voice soft. I'm glad you're happy. Ilara's gaze drifted for a second, as if picturing something beyond the market. Projects, people, a life built on purpose. I am, she said quietly. I worked for it. Cameron smiled, small, genuine. You did. Ilara shifted her basket in her arms. Take care of yourself, Cameron. Cameron swallowed. You too. Ilara turned to go, then she paused, looked back. Cameron? He lifted his head. Ilara's voice was gentle but firm. Don't measure your life by what you lost. Measure it by what you grow next. Cameron's throat tightened. He nodded. I will. Ilara gave him one last look, calm, kind, complete, and walked away into the sunlight. Cameron stood there for a long moment, breathing in the smell of wet earth and herbs and warm bread. He felt the old hunger for status flicker somewhere deep inside him. But it didn't control him anymore. Because now he understood. Success isn't a penthouse. It isn't applause. It isn't walking into a room and watching people adjust their posture. Success is waking up and not hating who you are. Success is building something that lasts, even if it grows slowly, especially if it grows slowly. Cameron turned toward a stall selling seedlings. A hand-painted sign read, Start small, grow true. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills, and bought a tiny rosemary plant. The vendor smiled. Good choice, it's hardy. Cameron nodded, holding the plant carefully as if it mattered. Yeah, he said softly. I'm trying to be. And as he walked home through Hudson Vale, sunlight on his face, soil under his nails, a small living thing in his hands, Cameron Voss finally felt something he'd chased for years and never found behind glass. Peace. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel small, leave a comment with the one thing you're choosing to grow next. Because rebuilding isn't loud, it's honest, and you're not alone in it.